You probably have heard this song before. One-Winged Angel, the theme of the villain Sephiroth from the acclaimed 1997 PlayStation hit Final Fantasy VII. It's such a good song, and of course, its lyrics are in Latin. But what do those lyrics mean? How do they tie into Sephiroth's character? And are the lyrics original or taken from something else? Salve, viatores, let's look into the Latin of One-Winged Angel. By the way, there is another video out there about the origin and meaning of One-Winged Angel's lyrics by the channel FactFace, link in the description. Go check it out, it's good! But I hope to provide a different perspective and new insight into the lyrics. So, incepiamos. Let's begin. So with this first little couplet, let's just go word by word, because I have a couple things to talk about with each of them. Istuans. Before getting into the definition, you know what, actually, dang. I don't remember exactly what Istuans means. Let's look it up on Wiktionary. This is my preferred dictionary, at least for Latin. And, oh, no results. Huh. Well, actually, that is because we have to look up Istuans. And there we go. This is because of the difference between medieval and classical Latin. The lyrics of One-Winged Angel are using medieval Latin. I am more experienced with classical Latin, the Latin that would have been spoken around the time of Caesar and Cicero, if not a bit before and after. But this is using Latin that is much closer to, like, I don't know, 12th, 13th centuries. So there have been some changes to the language. It is still fundamentally Latin, but there are changes in pronunciation, spelling, maybe some definitions are different, maybe some words have new definitions, maybe there are entirely new words in general. But in this case, the diphthong, two vowels that combine to make a single sound, I, has slowly changed from being pronounced as I to something more like E. And E eventually starts to be written as just E. And eventually you get to the point where someone just looks at it and is like, ah yes, that looks like estuans. And that's how the song is pronouncing it, estuans, instead of what I think should be eastuans. We'll be seeing a few different medieval pronunciations as well, and I'll point those out as we go. But for now, eastuans. It is a present participle, meaning burning or writhing from aistuo, aistuare. And if you don't know what a participle is, it is essentially an adjective that is formed from a verb. So in a different context, you could say istuans arbor, the burning tree, and that's how that works. Though here it's being used just by itself, and what is burning is implied. Then we have interius. Interius is an adverb, something that is more describing a verb, which in this case is actually being used for istuans because, again, it's formed from a verb originally. So adverbs can modify participles. And interius means inside or within. So currently it's the burning or writhing inside or within. Then ira vehementi. Ira is rage, wrath, anger, anything like that. And vehementi, this is another medieval pronunciation thing. In classical Latin, V is pronounced like a W, so it would be vehementi in classical Latin. But eventually it morphs into the V that we all know with the V sound, so it is vehementi, which is a form from vehemens, an adjective that means vehement, ardent, furious, passionate, all that sort of stuff. Just very strong feelings. So ira vehementi is like ardent wrath. However, this couplet is not just burning inside ardent wrath. We have to look at the cases of the words. Now, what do I mean by cases? So Latin works very differently from English. The endings of the words are what tell you what the word is doing. And for adjectives and nouns, these are called case endings. There are several of them, but we will just be going over the ones that we see. For now, we see istuans. That is in the nominative case. And the nominative case is for the subject of the sentence, the one that is doing the action. Though, of course, we don't exactly have an action, though the action is kind of istuans, but it's the subject. Whatever. And then vehementi is clearly not the nominative. As I said, it's formed from vehemens. That's the nominative. Vehementi can be either dative or ablative. The dative doesn't matter right now because it is in the ablative, as shown by adjectives have to modify their corresponding nouns in gender, number, and case. And since ira can be either nominative or ablative, the only way it works is if vehementi and ira are both in the ablative case. So we know that vehementi is modifying ira, ardent wrath. But then what is the ablative case? What does that do? Well, it does a lot of things, but here we're only going to be concerned with
ablative of manner. Ira vehementi is describing the manner in which the burning inside is happening. Therefore, it is burning inside with ardent wrath.
So, sors. It is a noun that means fate or lot. Imanis and inanis are both adjectives. Imanis means monstrous, and it can mean it in both senses. In sense of size, so like huge, enormous, gigantic, monstrous in size, as well as in character, like savage, inhuman, brutal, just a monstrous being. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to go with translating it imanis as monstrous. Just, it covers both bases. Inanis means inane, empty, meaningless, that kind of thing. Honestly, I kind of like just going with inane here, because I like the word inane, and it's just directly descended from inanis. Et is a simple conjunction meaning and. So the whole thing together is monstrous and inane. And both imanis and inanis are nominative and agree with sors, so they are modifying sors as adjectives. And the whole phrase is a monstrous and inane lot. Or if you want to match the Latin word order, a lot monstrous and inane. First off, V in classical Latin is pronounced like a W, so it would be veni and not veni. Eventually it becomes the V we know today. Veni and venias are both formed from the same verb, venio venire, which means to come. Veni is the imperative form of venio. Imperative is one of three moods of Latin. These express a sort of mode of action of the verb. Imperative is for commands, so here, veni means come, like you're telling someone to come to you or to some place. Venias is another of these moods, the subjunctive. This mood is for more uncertain actions, like actions you want to happen or doubt will happen, that kind of thing. It's honestly really tricky to get the hang of, but here we'll see two different uses of the subjunctive, first with venias, and then later with facias. So, venias. It's second person present active subjunctive. So, you are the subject, the action is happening in the present, and being done by the subject. And here, the subjunctive is conveying more of a want or hope that you come. This is called the optative or volative subjunctive, expressing a wish or want. Here, it's like the words are using the hope to put more emphasis on having whoever or whatever you is to come. Like, come, oh please come, that kind of thing. I would put it more like, would you come, or may you come. But translation could be a bit more art than science, so you could do whatever sounds best to you, as long as it accurately represents the intention behind the words, of course. So we currently have come, would you come? Ne me mori facias. The grammatical term for what's happening here is a negative purpose clause. Basically, lest this happen, or so that this does not happen. Because I like fun, I'm going to translate ne as lest. Ne is the word that is showing you that this is a negative purpose clause. And it specifically needs a verb in the subjunctive in order to do this. Luckily, we have that with facias. So let's just go straight to facias. Facias in classical Latin would be pronounced as facias, since C was always a hard C. But in medieval Latin, it's become a bit closer to C's in modern Italian, where if certain vowels follow it, then it becomes a ch sound. Facias comes from facio facere, which is to do or make, and is the second person present active subjunctive. So, you make, combining with ne for lest you make. Then me is exactly what it looks like, me. It is the accusative form of ego. The accusative is another case just like the nominative and ablative, except it is for the direct object of the sentence, what the action is happening to. So in this case, it is lest you make me. Mori is the infinitive form of morior mori, meaning to die. The infinitive is an indefinite mood, translated as to verb. In this case, to die. However, lest you make me to die sounds off, so we translate it as lest you make me die. This use of the infinitive here is called a complementary infinitive, as it's complementing the main verb, completing the idea. So as a whole, this line is, "Come, come, would you come, lest you make me die?" During the chanting of these lines, we also get a couple more words. Both gloriosa and generosa are adjectives. Gloriosa means glorious, and generosa can mean generous or noble. And here's another slight difference, kind of like C with classical Latin. G in classical Latin is always a hard G, so it would be generosa instead of generosa. But just like with G in modern English and Italian, when certain vowels follow that G, it becomes soft and sounds like J. And that's all the lines. So before we move on to interpretation, here's my translation of each line while they're being sung. Now, I'd like to give a very brief overview of Sephiroth's story, just for anyone who hasn't played Final Fantasy VII. Like, myself, I have not played it, so I don't know the details. But, from what I could read on the wiki, Sephiroth was created by a Professor Hojo using the cells of this being called Genova. He was trained to be the perfect super soldier, including what basically amounted to torture in order to harden his heart and make him able to endure immense pain. Sephiroth became one of the greatest soldiers ever known, and a war hero despite many of his deeds being made up, at least at first. One fateful mission was to a village called Nibelheim, to investigate the monsters appearing at the Nibel reactor, and there he found the remnants of Professor Hojo's experiments, including the tank, which held his mother, Genova. Discovering it all, Sephiroth went mad, believing himself a descendant of the ancient Cetra through his mother, who were destroyed by humanity, and he pledged to destroy humanity. So he burnt Nibelheim to ashes, and was promptly tossed into the lifestream by some nobody named Cloud. Though he was tossed into the lifestream, Sephiroth survived, and he manipulated everyone into eventually being revived as basically a god, so that he could destroy humanity.
With the context out of the way, let's talk about how these lyrics connect to Sephiroth. This is probably referring to Sephiroth's burning rage and hatred of humanity after the Nibelheim incident, where he discovered the truth of Professor Hojo and his own creation, which caused him to burn the city to the ground in rage. This little couplet is definitely referring to the horrible lot that Sephiroth has drawn throughout his entire life. I mean, he never really knew any family aside from Professor Hojo, who experimented on him, in fact, created him just to be a super soldier and tortured him to be that super soldier. As well as, being a soldier in general, tons of war, and then the whole Nibelheim incident, where he finds out about all those experiments, finds his quote-unquote mother, Genova, goes mad, declares that humanity must be exterminated, and then dies, basically, until he's revived. But still, he finds a goal in life, but his life really sucked. And as we'll see later, these lyrics, as well as their original context, really agree with that. This, honestly, kind of seems like Sephiroth begging for his godhood to come, especially combined with the next line of Gloriosa Generosa. He's begging for his godhood to come so that he can reclaim the planet for his people, I guess, lest he die or may as well be dead and stuck in the life stream forever. And again, it works very well in tandem with Gloriosa Generosa, as with those two adjectives, I think those are just how Sephiroth sees himself and his, savior complex. A glorious and noble being that will purge the plague of humanity from this world. For anyone who has actually played Final Fantasy, feel free to reinterpret these as you wish. I am very interested to see how others interpret these lyrics in terms of Sephiroth. But let's actually turn to the origins of these lyrics, because they were not created just for Sephiroth in Final Fantasy. They've actually existed for hundreds of years prior. So, these lyrics are not original to Final Fantasy or Sephiroth. They come most directly from a cantata called Carmina Burana, composed by a Karl Orff, a German composer who lived from 1895 to 1982. He composed it between 1935 and 1936, and it was first performed in 1937. The Carmina Burana is his most famous cantata. I had never heard of it before researching for this, but I had heard it. Yeah, if you, back in high school, watched a lot of Nostalgia Critic like I did, you've heard this song a good bit. But of course, the lyrics are not original to this Carmina Burana. They originate in the Carmina Burana. This is a manuscript from 11th, 12th century that is composed of a ton of different medieval Latin poems, as well as some German poetry, but mostly Latin. Orff's Carmina Burana uses select poems, or at least parts of poems, from this manuscript. And the poems in this manuscript vary from fortune to love, satire, and plenty more. And though the lyrics for One Winged Angel come most directly from Orff's Carmina Burana, I'm going to be looking at it in its original context. Oh, and also, I just want to complain about this. It is so difficult to find anything
about the original manuscript, separate from Orff's selections. You look up Carmina Burana, it's Orff. You try to look up specific lines from these poems, and it's Orff. Man, it just was very difficult. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, we don't know a ton about most of these poems that I'm going to be talking about, but let us start with the poem that I can find the most information about. This is Carmen 191, also known by its first couple words, Estuans Interios, but also sometimes called Confessio, confession. We don't know the authors of most of the poems in the Carmina Burana, but we do know a few, including this one. The Confession is one of several poems that are authored by a man only known by his pen name, Archpoeta, or Archpoet. He lived in the mid to late 12th century. As is suggested by only knowing him by his pen name, we really can only conjecture about what the man was like and what his life was like. Apart from a few details, like he had a wealthy patron, and that several of his poems were very popular, including Estuans Interios, his confession, as this one specifically is preserved in several manuscripts outside of the Carmina Burana. However, because of this, there are also a couple versions of this poem that have one or two differences. The one that matters to us is we have Interios in One Winged Angel and Orff's Carmina Burana, but in other manuscripts, it is Intrinsecos. It's not like it really matters that much, maybe for like the meter or the poetry, but they mean the exact same thing. So what is the confession about? What is the Archpoet confessing? Well, he's confessing to all the sorts of sins he's committed that he's been caught doing by one of his contemporaries, and is also making a defense of them. These sins include drinking, gambling, just kind of enjoying women, all that jazz. He's clearly pissed like Sephiroth, but not even close to the exact same way. And he's not declaring war against humanity either. Just a bit peeved that he got caught doing stuff that he shouldn't be doing, but also wants to do, so he's trying to defend his actions. Next, we have O Fortuna, or Carmen 17. This poem only appears in the Carmina Burana. It appears in no other manuscripts that we know of. And as such, we have no idea who the author is. However, we clearly have some strong emotions coming from this guy. Because, well, let me read you the first few lines of this poem, and you should get an idea of what the whole poem is about. O fortuna, velut luna, statu variabilis, semper crescis, aut decrescis. O fortune, like the moon, changeable in position, always you wax or you wane. The whole thing's about the fickleness of fortune. Things happen nice to this guy, but things also just come crumbling down. And I mean, that's pretty typical for life in general. However, it's only really like first stanza? I'm not very experienced with music stuff. Only the first part of this poem, the first stanza or so, is like that. The rest of it, it's all negative. So you get sortus immanis et inanis later on in the second stanza, a fate monstrous and empty. But then in the final stanza, you get a repeat of that. Sortus salutis et virtutis, a fate of safety and virtue, which sounds pretty good. But it's immediately followed by mici nunc contraria, now opposed to me. So yeah, this guy does not get that nice lot in life. Kind of like Sephiroth. I think this poem very much fits Sephiroth, where like things are going up and down, but then they just go down at a certain point. I guess you could argue that things get better for Sephiroth once, he gets what he wants, and after manipulating Cloud to get in the black materia and to become basically a god with safer Sephiroth. But I still wouldn't say It's a good lot. Up next is Veni Veni Venias, or Carmen 174. This is yet another song that appears only in the Carmina Burana. And again, no idea about anything with the author. Aside from, he is having a very opposite time of the previous one, because this is a very jovial love poem. Now, I've heard that this is supposed to be kind of, like, it's supposed to be raunchy, but it's very much not. Things get a bit raunchier later on in later poems, but this one, no, this is very innocent, at least in my interpretation. But there are a couple poems by the Roman Catullus, which some people interpret as being very raunchy, and I'm talking specifically about, what was it, Catullus 2 and 3, which are about the sparrow, his girl Sparrow, and how the sparrow is supposed to be a metaphor for a certain body part of his. And I never got it. I never saw it. I don't know. I could just never see past just a literal sparrow there. But I don't know. But it's the same thing here. Apparently this is supposed to be a bit raunchier, but I just cannot see it. Also, just as a side note, this poem is very, very different from any other Latin poetry that I've read, and I would love to talk more about the Latin someday, but for now, let's just keep it brief. And might I add, love poem being used for Sephiroth is very, I don't know, it doesn't seem like Sephiroth is super conceited. I mean, he's got a god complex, but he doesn't seem to love himself that much. It's just he wants to do a certain thing and needs that power to do that thing. So very different from what you'd expect if you start from the perspective of Sephiroth, Final Fantasy, and One-Winged Angel. And lastly, we have Gloriosa Generosa, also known as Carmen 77, better known as Ave Formosissima from Orff's selections. But it has another name that we will get into later. And for the last time, this is also a poem that we only find in the Carmina Burana, and we have no idea who the author is. And before I get into the actual original poem, let me just... It was difficult even to find the Carmen number of this poem. The only reason I could find that was because somehow I was able to find Tertarian.net, which had a reading of the poem and its number, except it was specifically the Orff selection of the poem, because this poem is much longer than just that. And then it took me so much longer to even find the poem itself in the manuscript, because the selection in Orff is not the beginning of the poem. So it was so much more difficult to find. I eventually found it, as you can see, but just a pain sometimes with these kinds of things. Anyways, Carmen 77, which is actually called Si Linguis Angelicus, because, Gloriosa Generosa, or even Ave Formosissima, is not the beginning of the poem. It is another love poem, which makes it kind of fitting that the lyrics in One-Winged Angel are paired with the lyrics for Veni Veni Venias, since they're both love poems. But this one differs a little bit, because the whole poem is about a man finding love, trying to actually interact with her. Apparently some old curmudgeon was preventing him from doing so. And then talking with her and attempting to persuade her to, be with him.
and she rejects him. The Orff selection from this poem is specifically him calling out to her and trying to get her attention and calling her like amazing things, as well as comparing her to a few mythical and legendary women. The first is Blanzaflor, who apparently was a very popular medieval romance character, but I had not heard of her before this. Then Helena, Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships, of course. And then he compares her to Venus herself. Gloriosa and Generosa, the adjectives used in One-Winged Angel, are specifically referring to Virgo, a virgin or maiden, so the girl he's talking to is a maiden, and then Venus, quite the different context from One-Winged Angel. And just like with Veni Veni Venias, it's hard to imagine this working in tandem with One-Winged Angel going by its original context.
And so we come to the end. We've translated the lyrics of One-Winged Angel, put them into context in Sephiroth's story, and took a brief look at the lyrics' original context in the 12th century Carmina Burana. This was a lot of fun for me. Looking at some Latin I probably would never have read otherwise, and I hope I shed some new light on One-Winged Angel for you all. If you have anything to add, whether about One-Winged Angel, Sephiroth, the Carmina Burana, or maybe some other games that have Latin that you'd like for me to translate through, feel free to leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, as well as any corrections you may have for anything that I've talked about. And if you're curious about learning more about anything I've talked about today, I have several links in the description. Until next time, valete viatores, and remember that Latin will never be a memory.